Even the very worst horror movies generally have something that prevents them from being a completely useless waste of time, whether that's a single decent performance, some rock-solid camera work, or even a few fun one-liners. These 10 horror films, despite being otherwise incredibly bad entries into the genre, dared to offer up a single scene which truly aspired to greatness, delivering a level of quality so far above everything else as to be totally hilariously jarring. These 10 scenes, whether terrifically well-executed suspense sequences or fantastically creative deaths, were awesome enough to clearly deserve a place in far better movies. Instead, they're pretty much the only reason to actually bother sitting through these films. The main reason these movies continue to be remembered, in a positive sense anyway, is for these single scenes of cinematic excellence, proving that someone working on them was actually trying to make something unique, rather than just phoning it in for an easy payday. So let's take a look. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here's 10 bad horror movies with one great scene. 10. Jamie hides in the laundry chute, from Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. By the time a franchise reaches anything beyond its 4th or 5th entry, expecting some kind of quality control is almost out of the question. Even by these standards though, Halloween 5 is known by many for being unforgivably awful. The film gets off to a strong start by introducing a retcon that tosses out the suggested ending of the previous film, aka the one thing that may have actually been interesting. Instead of Jamie Lloyd taking up Michael Myers' mantle, Myers actually just escapes and carries on as he is. Amongst all of this disappointment, however, there is one sequence that almost makes the film worthwhile. This is the beautifully tense moment of hide and seek, where Jamie hides in a laundry chute as Michael stalks her. With minimal music and claustrophobic camera work, it's the perfect example of how often less is more in horror. This is the only scene in the whole film that seems plausible as a John Carpenter-inspired bit of direction. The only shame is that the even better original cut had to be altered after the MPAA forced the director to get rid of a beat where Jamie gets stabbed in the leg. 9. The water fight from The Strangers Pray at Night. In a mostly forgettable movie, this particular scene stands out as belonging in a much better film. This decade-later sequel to The Strangers was all around unimpressive, but we almost caught a glimpse of greatness towards the end of the film, as Luke gets caught in a fight poolside. The addition of Bonnie Tyler's total eclipse of the heart playing out over the motel's PA system was nothing short of a stroke of genius. Luke kills one of the strangers, only to find himself next battling against another of the group, this time wielding an axe. Amidst the chaos, Luke falls into the pool, and as he attempts to escape, he gets slashed in the side and left either to bleed out or drown. Between the funky neon lighting, the inspired use of Bonnie Tyler, and the genuine melancholy of watching Luke lie bleeding in the water, it's an expertly crafted sequence in a film that absolutely didn't deserve it. 8. Strom's emergency tracheotomy in Saw 5. At some point, we all have to admit to ourselves that Saw has been patchy at the best of times, and Saw 5 is no exception. For the most part, the film is a mess of expository flashbacks and mediocre kills, and into this mix we add the frustrating decision to kill off one character who might actually have been smart enough to take down Detective Hoffman, that being Agent Peter Strom. It's early on in the film when we see Strom's potential, as he wakes up with his head in a box slowly filling with water, which will eventually drown him. In a grisly yet incredibly smart move, he uses a pen to perform an emergency tracheotomy on himself, allowing him to breathe despite the watery box stuck on his head. Whilst the editing of this scene may be a seizure-inducing nightmare, the idea is pretty badass. It does remain a shame, however, that despite his quick thinking, Strom ends up crushed between two walls at the end of the movie, prematurely disposing of a great character in the process. 7. Samuel L. Jackson gets eaten in Deep Blue Sea. Deep Blue Sea is up there as one of the dumbest big-budget horror movies ever made, and though it's amusing enough in the so bad it's good sense, it could never be argued as a stunning, well-crafted bit of cinema. There may be one exception, though. Corporate executive Russell Franklin, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is delivering a rousing speech to the survivors of the madness When at the exact moment he begins to explain his game plan, a shark jumps their enclosure and drags him into the water before ripping him to shreds. Don't get me wrong, the film is badly acted, poorly paced, and riddled with bad CGI, but Russell's death is in equal measures shocking and hilarious, and just what we needed to help us through this otherwise garbage movie. 6. The liquid nitrogen kill from Jason X. There's no way anyone expected anything good from this movie. The movie itself is so full of cringe, whether that's the acting, the visual effects, or the plot, that it can feel like an arduous task just to sit through it. However, there is one scene that stands out amongst the rest. When a medical intern is performing an autopsy of Jason's defrosted corpse, he suddenly wakes up, yes, really, and dunks her head into a vat of liquid nitrogen. Again, yes, really. Her face freezes solid and he pulls her out just to immediately smash her mug on the desk, shattering it into a million pieces of frozen gore. Disgusting and shocking, but weirdly effective. The kill was busted by the Mythbusters in 2009 as impossible to replicate fully, but if you're looking for scientific plausibility, then maybe look somewhere that isn't Jason in space. For many, this is one of the best kills in the franchise because of its spontaneous, imaginative presentation. And even if the movie itself sucked, at least this wacky kill fitted right into the weirdest Jason movie of all. 5. Paris Hilton's death in The House of Wax 2005. It's fair to say that the 2005 House of Wax remake isn't the worst of all unnecessary horror rehashes, but it's also far from being a genuinely good film, and it doesn't offer up much beyond its decent kill sequences. The film is almost 2 hours long, and made to feel longer by the irritating roster of characters, but if you can make it through that, you'll be rewarded with a scene so juicy that Warner Bros. Actually spoiled it in advance. The scene in question is the death of Paige Edwards, a vapid young woman played by Paris Hilton in a not-so-subtle parody of her real-life public persona. Paige ends up being stalked by the movie's shadowy killer, and after a tense chase has a gigantic metal pole thrown through her head like a javelin. And because it's not gnarly enough, after she bounces off a metal fence, she falls back towards the ground and the pole is pushed further through her skull. It's a really visceral kill and easily the most memorable part of an otherwise forgettable remake, such that the studio literally marketed the film by inviting people to watch Paris Hilton die on screen. 4. The basement scene from Annabelle. Annabelle is for sure the worst film in the Conjuring universe, an atmosphere-devoid, unintentionally comical farce filled with bad acting and exhausting cliches. But there is just one scene which actually captures the essence of James Wan's work on the original Conjuring. This is when the protagonist, Mia, finds herself targeted by a supernatural entity in her apartment building's basement. Mia flees back to the elevator only to find that the entity is playing with her and it kills the lights to the entire apartment complex. This forces Mia to make a terrified run from the elevator back to her apartment. When she trips on her way back though, she peers down to see a long, spindly hand climbing the stairwell, and after running some more, she briefly encounters the demonic entity face to face before finally returning to the supposed safety of her apartment. Even with its jump scares, it's a positively restrained set piece compared to the rest of the movie, making the most of its claustrophobic setting and the universal fear of things that go bump in the night. 3. The Tooth Fairy kills Kyle's mother in Darkness Falls. Darkness Falls is a mostly ridiculous and unpersuasive horror film in which a man, Kyle Walsh, returns to his childhood home to do battle with the creature that killed his mother 12 years earlier. Don't laugh, the Tooth Fairy. As stupid as 95% of the movie is, the opening scene in which we witness the murder of Kyle's mother is pretty bone-chilling. Unlike every other set piece in the film, director Jonathan Liebesman takes his time and wrings every last ounce of suspense out of the young Kyle encountering the monster. It seems like a conventional enough horror movie sequence at first, but cleverly subverts expectations by having the mother be the ultimate subject of the Tooth Fairy's wrath rather than Kyle himself. The ominous shot of the Tooth Fairy floating above the bathroom door whilst Kyle cowers inside is terrific, though sadly that's where all of this film's promise ends. So for a better overall execution of a similar idea, I recommend you check out David F. Sandberg's more recent horror flick, Lights Out. 2. The Razor Wire Massacre in Ghost Ship. Any film with a name as farcical as Ghost Ship is not a film film you can expect a lot from. You'll struggle to find many people who actually remember anything beyond the first 10 minutes of this flick, because it's so aggressively front-loaded with good stuff that everything else pales in comparison. The opening scene takes place in 1962 and shows the gloriously gory fate of the passengers aboard the doomed SS Antonia Graza. An unseen entity pulls a lever which causes a giant spool of razor wire to slice through the dance floor like butter, cutting everyone in half save for a young girl who's too short to be sliced. But hey, you're never too short to be traumatized for life. If we ignore the fact that the scenario is completely ridiculous, the fusion of practical and digital gore effects make the scene thoroughly impressive. It would have made for a great short film, but the rest of the movie is a frustratingly bland squandering of overqualified actors that just isn't worth investing an hour and a half into. Finally, number 1, The Werewolf in the Parking Lot from Cursed. Wes Craven's 2005 werewolf movie Cursed absolutely lives up to its name, given that the film was continually tampered with during post-production, with the Weinsteins ordering Craven through 3 rounds of reshoots before they were happy. Even then, the film was taken away from Craven and butchered in editing, replacing Oscar winner Rick Baker's practical wolf effects with CGI and cutting it for a PG-13 rating. Unsurprisingly, the end result was just terrible. There is one single scene, however, which still feels like it was helmed by Craven rather than some anonymous studio minion. The scene in question involves the death of Jenny Tate, who finds herself pursued by the werewolf in a parking garage. It's a genuinely tense sequence, largely thanks to its focus on human terror over excess CGI, though there is definitely some of that too. What really makes the scene stand out is that Jenny is decidedly smarter and more resourceful than most of the movie's characters, at least until she peeks out of the elevator shaft and gets torn apart. Sadly, the original version of Jenny's death was much gorier than this, showing in detail as she gets her stomach torn open, but the bloodletting ultimately got lost as the aforementioned PG-13 mandate wreaked havoc on post-production. And that's it for our list of 10 bad horror movies with one great scene. If you can think of any more, then please do let us know in the comments down below, and remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. I've been Amy from What Culture, and until next time, I'll be writing the unofficial sequel to Darkness Falls, where I'll be focusing on the Easter Bunny.